Hi everybody, Mr. Farmer here, and today we're talking about fiscal policies with AP Macroeconomics. So fiscal policies are going to be the main overall thing, but then we're going to be talking about discretionary versus passive fiscal policies, expansionary versus contractionary, and then clarifying what built-in stabilizers are, which can go back to the passive fiscal policies. So some kind of things to ponder as we go through, kind of relating to what we were talking about before. Think about this. What will happen in the long run if the economy is under full employment? The aggregate supply will shift to the right until it's at full employment. What will happen in the long run if the economy is over full employment? Well, classical theory says the aggregate supply will shift to the left until we are again at full employment, meaning we're at the LRAS. How about the third one? If the economy is under full employment and there's an increase in consumer spending, what has or potentially will happen? The aggregate demand will shift to the right. And I want us to remember this last one as we go through, because before we were talking about how the aggregate supply will shift to where at full employment, but there are other ways to get to that position, and that's what today's about. So again, here we are currently, and the blue is going to be below, or our short equilibrium is above the blue full employment. If we are at the short equilibrium, and the yellow instead is our full employment, that would be under full employment. So again, we're trying to get back to those sections depending. So fiscal policy, before we get into the details, is federal government policies or local or state government policies. And the focus is going to be on the economic aspect. Okay. So discretionary or active fiscal policies are changes in government spending and taxes that are at the option of the federal government, meaning their actions are being discussed, they're actively pursued, votes have taken place, executive orders have been passed. They're not automatic. Typically, it's on the advice of the Council of Economic Advisors, which are the three official economic advisors to the President of the United States. And in contrast, we have non-discretionary or passive or automatic. All three of those things are the same thing. These ones are built into the system, hence a later topic. They're passive, meaning they automatically occur because it's built into the system. For instance, taxes is a passive automatic one. Unemployment benefits, if you meet that threshold, you're already part of that. Nothing has been actively done. It's based on past legislation. Okay, so it automatically goes in. There's no discussion going on, hence non-discretionary. So we're starting with discretionary or active fiscal policies. For expansionary, again, these are used during recession. So again, we're currently at the AD blue, and we want to be at the full employment, which is going to be at AD prime, this red one right here. So we want to get to there. So we have cyclical unemployment during a recession. So what can we do? Well, again, the goal is for the government to get your aggregate demand curve over to your AD prime to full employment. So how can you increase aggregate demand? Well, the government can do three things. They can increase government spending, they can reduce taxes, or they can do a little bit of both. That's it. So why the big discussions in Congress? Where does the government spend their money? How much does taxes get reduced, and who gets that? And to what extent is all this happening? That's the discussion, but there's really a couple of things the federal government can actually do with this. And again, we're focusing on the fact that these are all going to be economic-based decisions. Of course, governments also have to deal with other situations that are not solely based on the economy. Okay, but we are going to be narrowing our focus on this. So increasing government spending, so we have a negative GDP gap. Okay. So we're currently at, here's our gap here, blah, blah, blah. If we want to go from 81 to 83 for a full employment. So an increase in spending by the government may be set off a ripple effect. So again, we have that multiplier. So the initial by the government could be this amount, where this green amount is. Okay. And then because that multiplier, 1 over MPS, is spending multiplier, it carries all the way across. Again, we kind of have that concept. So you have this GDP gap here. Okay, so that's the change in total GDP. And if you know your multiplier, then you know how much to change the spending or the taxes. So again, unemployment will fall as real GDP increases, unemployment falls. Or another way of saying that is there is going to be an increase in employment. So again, these are all discretionary policies or active policies. How about reducing taxes? Government cutting taxes increases disposable income. And the hope is then that people will start spending more. Again, we have our tax multiplier, which is negative MPC over MPS. This tax multiplier is typically smaller by mathematical definition. It is a smaller amount. And there's pros and cons to these, to using taxes over the government spending. So the government can spend, the government can alter taxes, or they can do a little bit of both. For us, there's no better way to do it. There's no optimal way. But again, this gets into a big discussion, which we're just not going to worry about. We're going to stick with the math on this, but that is a larger concept. How about contractionary fiscal policies? Well, again, when we have demand pull inflation, that's typically what these things are talking about. How about stagflation? It's harder to combat. We don't really get to touch on that one. So when demand pull starts acting up, we need to kind of rein in the economy. So the solution? Decrease government spending, cool down the system, raise taxes, or again, a little bit of a combo. So decrease government spending, once again, we're trying to reduce government spending, going the other way from 83 down to 82, so we can be at the full employment here. Now, does deflation occur? Again, for our class, we're not going to worry about that. We'll just say it goes from P2 down to P1 and be done. In real life, what happens? Does it actually occur? It's a big question mark. Are we actually at this Keynesian portion of the aggregate supply curve, in which case there's very little deflation? It's hard to tell. Okay, so for us, we'll just say yes, there is deflation and not worry about it. In reality, it's probably more likely to have just a low level of inflation, like under 1%, for instance, compared to having a negative inflation. Okay, so that's the typical. Again, we aren't going to worry about that. We're just going to say, you know what, our graph says it goes from P2 down to P1 and be done. If you're given a graph and says, oh, you're at 82 and you shift to 81, then you can see graphically there's been no deflation. You're still at that P1 level. Regardless, this is why we do focus on the output. The real GDP is now at the potential output. We've cooled down the economy. We've simplified it down. Or again, you can increase the taxes. Again, you take away the money, you take away the willingness or the ability to spend money. So fiscal policy and the ADAS model, again, actions taken by the government can stimulate or hinder the economy. So which is better? Well, if I was going to draw a line in the sand, big government, okay, typical on the Democrat side, is if it is believed social infrastructure needs are not being met, okay, during times of recession, then increased government spending would be preferred over a decrease in taxes. In times of demand pull inflation, increased taxes. The idea being that the increase in spending can be focused on programs they may not be able to do as well, and the government can see the broader picture. In times of demand pull inflation, increased taxes. Why? So the government can choose where that money is going to be going, okay, and that those welfare programs, whatever they're being used, can continue on. Smaller government, again, drawing a line in the sand, typically on the Republican, the right-hand side of the aisle. During times of recession, cut taxes. Let the people decide where the money is going to go. It's not the job of the government, is that whole conversation there. In times of demand pull inflation, decrease government spending. Let the people decide where their money goes, again, so the government kind of stay out. Now, for us, I want to mention, as far as if there's a change in taxes, usually we talk about personal income taxes in the households. If there's a change on business taxes, that gets tricky. That can change the aggregate supply and the aggregate demand. Aggregate supply because it affects the amount of money that the businesses all have, and therefore they can either produce more stuff or less stuff based on an increase or decrease in taxes. Or there's the the businesses can invest more, so aggregate demand, so that can shift things. So typically we'll just shift one or the other, or question will identify how does this impact the aggregate demand or the aggregate supply. But business taxes are tricky because it could be a double shift. Theoretically, both of them work. Okay. Typically, since we're with AP, that's College Board. Typically, College Board is on the demand side of things. So we'll be shifting the aggregate demand curve just to kind of match up with that. And there is definitely argument for aggregate supply shifting as well. So practice, let's kind of go through this. The economy is facing a negative GDP gap. Okay, so we'll be at 81 or 83 if we had a negative gap. We'll be at 81. What should the government do in reference to taxes? Increase taxes or decrease taxes? We're being generic. We're not going to talk about business versus personal, just generic taxes. Increase or decrease? What do you think? Okay, we would decrease taxes. If you decrease taxes, that would then spur increase in spending, either by households or businesses. And we're going to assume the government maintains their spending level even with the decrease in taxes. Scenario 2, the economy is facing a positive GDP gap. So again, would that be 81 or 83? Okay, a positive gap would be 83. In order to stabilize the economy, what should the government do in reference to spending? Decrease the spending. Where? We don't know. We're just doing generic of a decrease in spending, and that would push this down. Now, again, kind of follow-up. Would the government have to decrease by the exact amount that this level is? No. Okay, they don't need to do this entire gap, whatever else it is, because the multiplier. So maybe they start out and do this portion, but then the multiplier carries it the rest of the way over until we get over there. Now that we need numbers and everything else, but that would be some consideration for this kind of a question. Okay. Built-in stability. These are going to be the passive, the non-discretionary, the automatic fiscal policies. So over the business cycle, government tax revenue automatically changes because people's income increases and decreases, and because the United States and lots of our countries are progressive tax systems, meaning that as your income increases, you pay a larger percentage in taxes. As your income increases, you'll automatically be taxed more. And as your income decreases, you'll automatically, passively, it's built into the system, be taxed at a lower percentage. So again, that's why it's called an automatic response, a non-discretionary. It's built in. There's no additional discussion for this. So previously, again, we held that taxes were constant, but that is not actually true. So we have this thing called the built-in stability graph, which looks about like this. It is a completely discussion-based graph here. Okay, so G right here is going to be government spending, and we're just going to hold that constant. Is that reality? No, but with that said, usually the government doesn't change their spending around that much regardless. It's pretty consistent from year to year. Obviously it changes with that. And then tax revenue is T is tax revenue. And then this is going to be GDP. So as the GDP is larger, we would assume households and businesses have more money, so they're going to be taxed at a larger rate. So a couple things about this. Tax revenue minus government spending equals budget. Either a surplus, if that number is positive, or deficit, if that number is negative. And again, this is called a built-in stabilizer because as the GDP increases, automatically a larger amount of taxes were taken out. We start out as taxing of 200, but if our GDP increases, people have more money, automatically people are paying more in taxes. A $100, whatever this number is, increase in taxes. Again, that was built into the system. It stabilizes the system. Why? As the economy increased, it automatically increased taxes, which is a contractionary policy. Well, if you go the other way, well, if you decrease, automatically you pay less in taxes, this $50. So as the economy is doing a little bit less, automatically there's a decrease in taxes, which again is an expansionary policy, but it was built into the system. So increasing taxes decreases aggregate demand. Decreasing spending is desired when moving towards inflation and vice versa. Hence, it's built into the system. And so the tax system is a great example of built-in stability. So like I said, we have a progressive tax system, and the idea is that as the tax revenue increases, or as the GDP is doing better, as households increase their incomes, they are taxed at a higher level. The proportional tax system, also referred to as a flat tax, is that the average tax remains constant as GDP rises. The tax revenue increases overall. And that's the idea is that you pay a flat 10% tax. No matter what your income is, you always pay that 10%. Hence, it's proportional to your income. And last one is regressive, and you don't hear this too often because most major tax systems aren't like this as far as incomes go. Some tax systems can act like a regressive tax system. So the example I give is, let's say you had two people. Person one makes $100. Person two makes $1,000. And they both buy a bottle of water for $1. Plus tax. Let's say it's a 10% tax. Then they're each paying 10 cents. So this is my overall tax. No matter what, person one and person two are both paying this. But since that 10 cents into the $1,000, it's going to be a lower tax for the higher income compared to the 100 income. They're going to pay a higher percentage in taxes because, again, that 10 cents. So in this way, some sales tax can act like a regressive tax system. And that's probably the closest example we can have to this kinds of a system. The more progressive a tax system is, the more built-in stability there is. So here's the 2019 U.S. marginal tax rate system. Okay, and so the idea is this: for the first $9,700, you pay 10% taxes. What if you make more than that? Well, you still pay this 10%, which is going to be this $970. But for every dollar above this $9,701, you're going to pay 12% on that number. Well, if you make above $39,425, then you're going to pay this amount, which is going to be the $970 plus 12% of this range, and it keeps going. So the idea here is as you increase your income, you are going to pay a larger percent. So there's the marginal tax rate and there's also the average tax rate. Average tax rate is the your actual income. And over that we talk about our taxes, total tax. In general, the average tax is going to be lower than the marginal tax bracket you're in. If you're in the 32% tax bracket, your average tax rate is going to probably be somewhere in the upper 20%. Now, it was changed in 2019. It was changed, so you can see there are some differences here. And so some of the major ones, just to point out, is like the second tax bracket is instead of 15% is now 12%. Okay, the third tax bracket is instead of 25%, 22%. It also only goes to $82,500 versus $93,700, and then 28 versus 24, 33 versus 32, and then we get to 35 and 35. These ones are the same, and then the highest tax bracket is 39.6 versus 37%. So all the personal income tax brackets decreased by a little bit. So would this be a discretionary or a non-discretionary policy to have this kind of a change from the old to the new? Okay, it's a discretionary because it was an act of policy. Okay, is this an expansionary or contractionary policy? Expansionary. There's an overall decrease in tax rates in general. So again, what we talk about is the fiscal policies: discretionary versus passive, expansionary versus contractionary, and built-in stabilizers. All right, hope that helps. Until next time.